newspaper, Capitol Hill Citizen. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
The viewpoints expressed in this program are the opinions of the people expressing them and are not necessarily those of Fresh Air Incorporated, its staff, or its board of directors.
Hi, this is Al McFarlane, host of The Conversation with Al McFarlane. You're listening to 98.3 FM, KFAI, Minneapolis. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Always kudos to KFAI. What a wonderful resource this is in our community. We used to use the slogan, a different radio station every hour. And that is so true because the format, the structure, the strategy is broadly inclusive and is genuinely engaging of us in all the ways we show up as African American, as Latinos, as Hmong, as Somali, as different constellations of our humanity, and you hear it all here on KFAI. Well, thank you for being here. Today's program is going to be what I promise, always a robust conversation. And I'm joined today by my colleague and co-host for today, Dr. Irma McLaurin, who's the Education and Culture Editor for Insight News. Irma, how you doing? You have to unmute there, unmute. No, well, I'm looking at you, but you're muted still.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
Broadcasting from Grinnell, Iowa.
Aha, awesome. We'll talk about that maybe in the transition between our two guests today. Like a minute or two. Today, we're pleased to have a memoir, talking about a memoir written by Menah Pratt. And I talked to her briefly, but I read her press release and I'm just so impressed. She's Vice President for Strategic Affairs and Diversity and a professor of education at Virginia Union. Menah, welcome to the conversation. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm at Virginia Tech.
Virginia Tech. Okay, thank you for making that clear. Thank you so much.
Sure.
You've got a book, a new memoir called Black Wild Girl, and it's described as an invitation for girls and women to discover and cherish their superpower. The press comments on it say, this encourages all of us to reclaim our superpower and to be change agents in life. That from Katrina Adams, who's the author of Own the Arena, who's a former CEO of the United States Tennis Association. And Naomi Tutu, an ordained minister and daughter of Bishop Tutu, said Menah Pratt has written a book that offers the chance to cry, to be empowered, to be educated, to be healed, to be liberated. Many more statements that acclaim this work and your work. Again, welcome. You tell us about Black Wild Girl. What's the story?
I'm honored first to be on the show, and thank you for your amazing work in the community and creating platforms for conversation and empowerment and uplifting our community. And of course, Dr. Irma, I've known you for a long time.
A long time, yes.
I was trying to think, it was one of the first. I'm the founder of a conference called the Faculty Women of Color in the Academy National Conference. And one of the early, this is in its 12th year this year in April, but one of the early sessions, you were one of the keynote speakers.
Yes.
So thank you. Black Wild Girl is based on 45 years of journals. So I have journaled since I was a young girl and tried to capture my life story of my journey from Black girlhood to Black womanhood. as the daughter of two highly educated parents, my father had a PhD in nuclear physics. Well, nuclear physics, you could just take that in the 1960s.
Wow.
Got his PhD from Carnegie Mellon Institute at the time. And my mother had a PhD in social work from University of Pittsburgh. So in the 1960s, I was the daughter of those parents who were raised and impacted by segregation, by legalized segregation in America, racism. My father was born in Sierra Leone, West Africa, so he also had a national origin, challenges in the academy. And so it was two highly educated parents trying to raise my brother and me in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and what that journey in America with the racism, with the sexism, the challenges of being a Black girl. And so that this book is about my journey as a Black girl in America.
And the lessons you deliver.
Right, and the lessons learned. And so it's organized almost like a play. So it's almost a performance, an emergence. It's divided into acts, stages, and scenes. So there's 12 acts because it's really an initiation journey. And it's a journey to capture and find my superpower. But it's really about the superpower that all of us have, that I believe we all have. But particularly as Black girls, I feel that there's a dynamic in society that suppresses our sassiness and that we have to, those of us who are courageous and feisty and brave enough, have to undertake initiation journeys to go and find that part of us that society kind of tried to stamp out. And I think that so the book is divided into these 12 initiation stages. And at the end of each stage, there are reflection questions. So the questions are really an opportunity for anyone who has the book, is listening, is reading the book, to journal and journey along and reflect on their own life as well as they read about my journey. Because it's really not about me. It's about us and our lived experiences.
Before I ask Dr. Irma to join in, let me share a little bit more about you from the notes that I have. And, the notes indicate that you are Dr. Menah Adiola Eyeside, pronounce that right? Eyeside Pratt. And you're described as a highly educated and talented Black wild woman who is a nationally recognized and diversity award-winning author of 4 books on race, gender, and diversity. And as a scholar, activist, and academic advocate, you founded the Faculty Women of Color in the Academy National Conference and the Black College Institute at Virginia Tech. Your notes say that you have 5 degrees, a law degree, a PhD, that you're a tenured full professor in the fields of education, critical race theory, critical race feminism, and Black feminism, that along with that, you balance the demands of marriage and motherhood, of navigating a miscarriage and the death of both your parents. You're also an entrepreneur. You own a frame shop and art gallery.
I used to, in past tense, used to.
Used to, okay. And you undertook a 7-year search for knowledge in the spirit world and in the world of the divine feminine. Your journey for self-discovery led you beyond America to the Bahamas, to Barbados, St. Kitts, Cuba, Israel, Egypt, South Africa, and Sierra Leone. And the objective is to connect with ancient indigenous cultures. I'm going to leave it right there. You know, what I feel like is that I would be really shortchanging everybody if I didn't step out and ask you and Irma to have a conversation and just let me listen to it, because I know you've got a lot to say. So
Absolutely.
Irma, jump in here and let's have this conversation.
Well, it's actually timely that this conversation is happening for many reasons. Dr. Pratt, Dr. Menah, Miss Menah, sisterhood, sister friend Menah. We sort of came together again. We've kind of been chatting with each other across LinkedIn, but I think it was the recent turn of events, a month ago, in which we had the tragic suicide of a Black woman leader, as well as the resignation of Dr. Gay at Harvard, that has kind of brought full attention to the fact that that is, someone described it as precarity, you know, in Black women's leadership. But before we get there, I'm here in Grinnell, and the reason that I think it's timely is that I was rushing from a previous meeting with Black women at Grinnell College. I am in the Black Cultural Center, and I think Cooper has a copy of the group photo we took. I insisted. And one of the pieces that I read was, you know, was about sister friends. And it's how we're using that term instead of girlfriends, because that actually captures, you know, the sentiment. And so to be here and to be able to share that knowledge, and I'll be sharing with them your own books, but this is the Black Cultural Center that I was in 50 years ago.
Wow.
If not more. And so it's very timely, because I think what you're writing about, as they listen to me talk about the ongoing, enduring friendships of Black women with Black women, which is something that doesn't get reported on a lot, I think they'll find the work that you're doing very useful. So I'll make sure it gets in the library.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know, I want to move back, circle back then to this idea that, and Elle, I'm sending you an article on it. You know, what I'm calling that, you know, what has happened with Black women's leadership is that we're basically under attack. And Al, you launched the year with my article on racialized ageism, in which I'm saying that as we look across the landscape, no matter what sector we look in, we see older white women, older white men, we see older Black men, but we see very few older Black women. And it doesn't matter what sector. We're seeing this in you know, the movie theaters. Who gets movies? And that's one of the points of my book, is that they keep finding platforms for aging actresses like Meryl Streep and others. But where is in fact the platform for Black women? But what do you see as, given that you've now had this 12-year span, what do you see as the precarity, the dangers that Black women leaders face?
It's real. It's really real, sadly. You know, I mean, the two you mentioned, but there was also Professor Kathleen McElroy, amazing journalist, scholar, opportunity at Texas, and that was denied to her. Nicole Hannah-Jones, again, an amazing, powerful scholar. And so just the humiliation. I mean, we had Nicole Hannah-Jones spoke, was one of our keynotes a few years ago at the FWCA. And she was like, you know, we still belong in the academy.
Well, I can tell you that before she even came on the scenes, I actually applied to a job at UNC Chapel Hill, and it was for a director of some kind of public humanities thing. And I didn't even make it to the interview stage. And the woman they hired had no administrative experience, and it was to run like $1 million center. And so I wrote a letter to the president and said, what is it about the fact that I've been a university president, I've been a deputy provost, I've been an associate vice president, I'm the founding executive director of an urban research university center, I've been tenured twice. What of those credentials does not qualify me to do this job? And of course, you go through the OEO, they give you some standard answer. And the woman they hired had no experience. And what we're going to see is that they're going to use that to give our platform to get on the job training. And so I wrote a piece called Airing UNC Chapel Hill's Dirty Laundry. And that was like almost a year before Hannah Nicole came on the scene. And I think that there should be, you know, we have to understand that Black women, you know, on the one hand, people see us as being more prominent in some ways, like with the rise of feminism, they say, well, there are more Black women. And it's true. In colleges and universities, there are more women, period. Black, white, or other.
That's correct.
Because for Black men, the high incarceration rate, we know that there's a prison, you know, from elementary school to prison pipeline. So they're not getting to college. If they do get there, they're usually channeled into athletics or something. So we see a larger proportion of Black men who are athletes. But that does not account for the fact that almost 85% of university presidents are still men and white men, while over 50% of all college enrollments are women.
Mhm.
So there's a disconnect where the leadership is not connected to who actually has the credentials. There's still very much a patriarchal space. And I would say what you have called out misogynoir, which is a particular form of anti-Black women patriarchy, where we are actually being targeted.
No, I wrote a recent LinkedIn post called The Weight and Hate of Black Womanness. And just the weight of being a Black woman in America and how we carry that around and what that means for our lived experience, solely based on the intersection of our race and gender. And I see at the conference every year, and our conference is April 11th to 14th, so it's coming up. The registration is still open. We're making it virtual as well as in person. And every year, 500, 600 women walk into the main ballroom exhausted. I mean, they are almost crawling in just with that weight, I think, of their experiences as women of color in higher ed. But they leave like encouraged. I mean, the point of the conference is to connect, support, and empower each other and yourself. And at the end of those 3 or 4 days, they walk out of there knowing they're not alone, that they're in community with one another. They've had opportunities.
We lost your sound, Dr. Pratt.
Yeah, I think we did for a moment.
Yeah.
You're back now.
And so I think the conference is just a powerful space for empowerment and encouraging women to persist no matter what, but also having strategies. I mean, they leave with concrete strategies for how to be successful in the academy.
And so could you share with us like 1 or 2 that over the course of your career, have been effective? Because people are asking me all the time, how did you remain resilient? So can you share with us?
Well, when I think about resilience of Black women in the academy, I have to think about my mother. So my book before this was about my mother's journey. It's called From Cotton Picking to College Professor, Lessons About Race, Class, and Gender in America. And it's her journey from Black girlhood, picking cotton, working as a maid, to getting 4 degrees and becoming a college professor when less than 1% of full professors were Black women in the 1970s. And her journey, and it's so interesting for both books kind of give you parallel journeys of my journey from Black girlhood to Black womanhood, my mother's journey from Black girlhood to Black womanhood, and the level of persistence really in the face of just extraordinary racism and sexism and trauma. I mean, the parallels in my mother's life and my life, sexual assault, we both experienced that. And as a mother, I wanted to make sure as much as I could that my own daughter, that wasn't a generational, that was passed down generationally. And so there are some themes that come up in this Black girlhood, Black womanhood journey. But I think I draw remarkable sort of inspiration from understanding Black history and what Black women, Black men have gone through, from enslavement to Reconstruction to the Civil Rights. I mean, it's been hard, but we're still here. We're still here. We're still fortunate.
But I think it's important for us to recognize that not everyone is getting that history. You lived with it, so you saw it. I'm from a working class family where, my father had a second-grade education. My mother dropped out of high school and finished the same year I did. So she certainly did that. But I'm first gen, so no one had been to college. And I think it's important that we find ways, which is part of what I'm trying to do in my Black Feminist Archive, and I want your mom's papers too, is that we're trying to preserve that, but we also have to keep telling the story. Because what happens is we're now in a moment of erasure where there is an attempt to sort of try and whitewash the past and pretend like certain events didn't happen. And so there have to be ways, and I think, Al, Insight News is an important source. And the fact that it's now archived on Issue is really important, that people can go back and see and have access to that history. So I think you're right, having access to the history. And then I would say the main thing is, there's a woman who's 109 and a half years old here, who is Grinnell's oldest alum, who is also Black. And I got a chance to see her 2 weeks ago. And Al, I'll be talking about bringing someone to talk about her journey. But one of the lessons she tells us, when people say, well, what was it like to be? She was the first Black woman to get a degree. At that moment in time, she's the only one. And her response is not mine to carry. Racism is not hers to carry. It's not her issue. So not taking it on, not absorbing it, not personalizing it, and understanding that there's a historical reason. But when she moved back into the Grinnell community, she was surrounded by family. I thought there were no indigenous Black families in Grinnell. That's not true. Grinnell was on the Underground Railroad. So we're unpacking, so I think you're right. Centering ourselves in historical knowledge is key. Having a good sense of who we are. Your mother gave you that sense of uplifting and the integrity of who you were as a person. We have to find ways to reinforce that with Black girls so that they feel centered in their identity. And so the young women that I saw today, that's what they were saying, to see me and to see all that I've done and to hear me, was very empowering for them. And so, it's good to be here for that reason.
Well, one of the things you mentioned, I just came from an event at our Black Cultural Center, and it was for Black women. It was a healing hour for Black women in higher education and beyond. And we just had a nice little conversation about who we are as Black women, what Black History Month means to us. And as I thought about the wonderful Black Cultural Center we have here, hearing you talk about the Cultural Center at Grinnell, I'm reminded that just this morning I did a post on LinkedIn about Texas, University of Texas, closing their multicultural cultural center. And those students having to do GoFundMes to try to pay for things the university used to pay for because they didn't have, they can't use state funds, and this very rigid and strict interpretation of the law. And so I just think about in these states where there's an anti-DEI movement, there is a real impact on students of color, on LGBTQ students, on students who are not documented. It's a real challenge. And I'm hopeful that we'll start to have more voices speaking up about it, more strategies, because at some point this is going to become a legal issue because there's going to be a disparate impact on marginalized communities because of this legislation. And so I'm hopeful that the tide will start to shift in some ways.
And I don't think people realize
I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. My guest, Dr. Menah Pratt, Vice President and Professor at Virginia Tech. My colleague and co-host, Dr. Irma McLaurin, who's an education editor here at Inside News. And before you continue with your question and comment, Irma, I want to acknowledge and thank Nazine, who sent a post saying she's at YouTube just tuning in, but I'm wondering why we can achieve these high levels of education, but the intellect doesn't drive us to have manufacturing plants and farms, organic nutrition islands, et cetera. What do you guys think about that?
Well, one is that there were always Black farmers. And in fact, the family here owned they were the first farmlands. There have been Black farmers, but Black farmers could not survive the organic thing because they did not get the same subsidies as white farmers. There are lawsuits still in place. So it's not like people didn't do these things. And remember, agro farmers then these big, large corporations came in and did everything they could to put Black farmers out of business. That's number one. We have had manufacturing plants, but every time Black people achieved a level of success, what happens? White mobs come in, they murder people, they burn down the facilities, or they chase them out and take them over, and then they write history as if they never existed. Black people have been involved in setting up industries and things. We have, before Madam C.J. Walker, there was another person, they had set up a cosmetology, beauticians, industry. But again, we live in a capitalist system. You have to have access to the means of control. In Mobile, Alabama, where I'm spending most of my time, there's the Jenkins Farm. It is the largest Black farm, and they talk about how white farmers intentionally tried to put them out of business, and that they were savvy enough to be able to go like gas. He couldn't get gas for his tractors and things. So he finally went to the gas producer and said, look, can we create a partnership? But what if they had said no? You can't run farm equipment without petrol. So it's not like, people act like Black folks don't know how to do anything, when in fact we have been doing things. And every time we reach a modicum of a success, all we have to do is look at the number of Black Wall Streets that were devastated. We had Black Wall Streets, we had financial wealth. It's not just intellect, right? So that's part of what you say is we need to center ourselves in our history, because obviously people don't know.
Yeah, the history is so important.
Menah, what do you think?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I recently came back from India and was reflecting on just all the ways that history is being controlled and the impact and the role of politics and the intersection of education and knowledge. I just think that's such an increasing issue in our world globally. And I think understanding the global context for a lot of things is just critically important.
Go into that more. I mean, I think that's critical. That's the whole point, is understanding education for whom, originated by whom, and what's the end game. On the one hand, we would be told and encouraged to believe that there's an objective reality called truth, and that it equalizes all living things. But on the other hand, our experience tells us that what's presented as objective reality is a narrative that supports somebody's identity and agenda. And wisdom, I think, demands that we become more critical as we proceed today, but also that we are intentional in establishing in us a belief that our vision is absolutely essential and critical to the unfolding of the affairs of human beings on planet Earth. And we have been systematically excluded, or they have tried to. I don't think we've been excluded. They have tried to. But the question is, where do we go from here? How do we take this moment and the knowledge we have, the skills we have, and ensure that we are not continually displaced and marginalized by other people's agenda and interest? Menah, what do you think, Menah?
Well, I think it's really a huge opportunity for education institutions. I think Black institutions, Black churches used to be huge sites of education. So during the voting rights, that was school. You went there and you learned your history. You got ready to, understand social justice movements. And I think we need another mobilization, not just of African Americans, but those of us who care deeply about humanity, to ask and answer those hard questions. Who are we trying to educate? Why are we trying to educate? What do we care about? How do we preserve our planet? The earth is very fragile and becoming increasingly fragile, but we're smart enough to figure this out. I mean, the types of things, and we can send instruments to the moon and to Mars and to outer space. Surely we can figure out how to deal with human beings face to face.
And I think we also have to travel, because, the Caribbean has been taking care of its environment for a long time. It's only when we get an upsurge of white tourists, that we begin to see the decimation of it. I was reading something, someone sent me a video about Belize, which is where I did my research, and how they are regrowing. The second largest barrier reef in the world is off the coast of Belize, and how they have been regrowing the coral reef. And what we get are white environmentalists who come in and who believe that they have all the answers without acknowledging the indigenous knowledge and the indigenous work. The same thing with Native Americans here.
Yes.
We did not have polluted rivers and things until we started having, massive incursions of whites coming in and taking over the land, using the land, wanting to put in oil fields and pipelines. That's where the decimation comes from. And yet it's made to seem as if somehow we're responsible for the damage that they do. And I think this is the critical issue, is that we have to keep telling the story from the children on up, not just adults. because it starts with children and teaching them how to be entrepreneurs in business. So intellect and hands-on experience are not mutually exclusive. We just have to find ways to bring them together.
Well, listen, before we close the segment, I wanted you, Menah, to talk about your new book, invite people to get it and how to follow you and support your work.
Thank you very much. So, Black Wild Girl, A Writer's Journey to Take Back Her Superpower is available wherever books are sold. It's on pre-order now. It'll come out April 2nd. It's got the companion journal, Black Wild Girl, Finding Your Superpower. So I encourage you to get to explore both of those opportunities. And I also want to shout out for women of color in higher ed who are faculty, graduate students, independent scholars, administrators, to think about attending the Faculty Women of Color in the Academy National Conference. It's April 11th to 14th, this 2024. It's in Arlington, Virginia, in person and also virtual. And they can go to our website, social media. They can follow me on social media, Menah Pratt, but also VTFWCA is the link for the conference. So thank you. I'm honored to have been on your show and to have this conversation with both you and Dr. Irma.
Well, let's call this the beginning, and we'll certainly have you back. Go ahead, Irma.
Yes, send me a flyer because this afternoon I'm actually holding a public writing workshop for BIPOC faculty here at Grinnell. Awesome. So Al, maybe we'll get some editorials that come out of this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Menah, and we'll see you later. Okay. Irma, before I bring my next guest in, take a minute, if you would, and talk about what you're doing at Grinnell. You talked a little bit about it, but take a second to tell us more about what's going on.
Today was in some ways the happiest day. Cooper, if you can bring it up, to actually, meet all these beautiful Black sister friends, at Grinnell and have them talk, to share with them some of my journey. And that is, I am in a month-long residency. I'm almost at the end, called Humanities in Action. And I'm an alumni scholar in residence. And what that has enabled me to do is to do a convocation on my memoir. I'm working on that, and it's kind of, in process. I did what they call a Community Friday, in which I called it Mapping Culture Change at Grinnell. I'm doing this workshop. And then I have been working with a team of 8 interns who are working with me to excavate the Black Grinnell experience from the archives. So it's the Black Feminist Archive Initiative. I've connected them with the people at UMass, and we've been looking through the materials, all these digital platforms. We now have a Black experience at Grinnell collection, and we hope to be able to make that more visible to people so that it's not a scattered history, but it's a very centralized history.
Thank you, Irma. Well, let's bring our next guest in. Mitra Jalali was sworn in to the St. Paul City Council in a special election in 2018, and she was reelected for a full term in 2019. Councilmember Jalali's previous work included being an educator, a community organizer, a policy aide, and congressional staffer to U.S. Representative Keith Ellison. Her priorities in office include attainable and affordable housing and homeownership, community first public safety and police accountability, sustainability and transit and community wealth building through economic development. Councilmember Jalali is also passionate about organizing inclusive community engagement and representation for all, including underrepresented and underserved community members. Councilmember, welcome to the conversation. Good to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm great. Hi, everybody. Very nice to see you here and honored to be part of the show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Let's talk about your development of policies and strategies for community wealth building. What are you doing?
Thank you. So, it is a big picture fact in our community that we do a lot of work here. We do a lot of business. We own businesses. We don't necessarily, as a community across all different backgrounds, have ownership of the land, of the property. That we have so much wealth and capital to offer our city, and also these extractive systems from housing to commercial ownership, they're making that they're not helping that wealth stay in the community. So I think this council coming in with so many relationships across our community, with a real focus on economic development and making sure that wealth that is built and generated here stays here, is looking at everything from, how can we support our land trust efforts? Like we have the Rondo Land Trust, and we also have other community land trusts that do work across the Twin Cities, as you're well aware, and really helping really build community power through ownership. And there's also this effort that we have in my ward around commercial co-ops. So really helping our community have a share of the ability to purchase property. I represent the Midway, and there are so many properties that are kind of sitting vacant. And if you look at the sale price of some of these buildings, it's like $1 million. And that is both steep for the everyday person and actually less steep if we combine our forces and, get community funding through a co-op model. There's co-ops in my ward that have started that membership can be anywhere as low as $100, which is still a lot. $100 is still a lot for the average working family.
Sure.
But in comparison to being able to only buy in at like 1,000 or a few thousand, which other co-op models are, we are trying to make that accessible. And we also have helped with some philanthropic funding so that people can have their share basically sponsored. So I think that the community has organized these different, Midway Investment Co-op, and also there's another one called Taproot Investment Co-op. These are models that I'm working to just grow. I see this as a thing that the community has put together, and my role as their council member can be directing investment and getting the word out through my platform. So really just amplifying those efforts. These are just some examples in more of the ownership realm. But when we talk about building community wealth, there's a jobs and labor protections and kind of people's actual income part of it. And then there's the macro, right? It's what's the map of ownership in our community in St. Paul here, and how do we make it healthier and centered on our constituents?
How do you see that progressing? It sounds to me that you and your colleagues are really making available, in some sense, for the first time, to our community what the city has done for the white community forever. But the levers of governance and the relationships that governance operated out of were relatively exclusive and often intentionally detrimental to Black and Brown communities. Witness Rondo, and witness the entire system across the town and across the country of gutting and devastating Black entrepreneurship as a policy. So how do you see changing? Before you answer that, talk about this unique constellation of city council members in St. Paul. You're making history. Talk about that, if you would.
I would say two things. One is I have been reflecting on how I made national news with a group of people. It was not a story of individual sheroes. It was a community power story, right? About this group of leaders that our community fought for and, door knocked hundreds of doors, gave thousands in grassroots donations when you add them all up. In many races were outspent by more conservative opposition that isn't based in the city. And so to get to that day with, there were some photos on the screen just a minute ago of our inauguration day. And that was a really special moment for us. So first, I just want to start with that it's an honor of my lifetime, and frankly, just a personal turning point in my whole journey in elected office, to go from serving through some of the most painful, absolutely devastating times in our community, through 2020 and kind of the recovery from that, to this moment where we're opening a new chapter. We know that our community has a lot of expectations for us. And in terms of being able to create access through that, so we have, I think, built out at the city with my former council colleagues and Mayor Carter's continued leadership of our city, these programs and processes that I think this council can now take the reins of the next chapter and help community access. So in the time I've been on the council, for example, we have helped support a developers of color cohort that is helping local developers of color not just start from scratch and learn the mechanics of development and financing and all of those pieces, but also really looking at where's the opportunity, right? We know in the city where we have vacant lots, sometimes city-owned lots, properties that we'd rather turn over and get into community ownership. And there's just so many technically public but still invisible, right? Processes, practices, funding sources, community, relationships. So I think that this council views our charge as demystifying that, as making that clear, as helping our community access tools and processes that as a city we have built out. You can go through a training and learn how to redevelop a small property. I'm helping a developer of color in my ward who is a Black business owner and also has a couple small scale properties he's working on. There's an empty lot on my block. There's an empty lot on my block that he identified, and he reached out to me. And when he told me the address, I was like, oh, you mean the lawn that's just like 5 houses down from where I live? So, it's about those relationships. It's about connecting the opportunities. And then we are basically helping as he looks at, the state just passed a lot of gap financing in funding. So the legislature that we also fought to elect and that we also want to represent us, not just in image, right, but in action, they passed $1 billion housing bill for everything from boosted up rental assistance to the money that makes the deals work, the funding that actually helps a project go from not possible to possible, and then from affordable, heavy air quotes, at the area median income, which is really out of touch with the average working resident, to the deeply affordable, which is where this council is focused. So that is how you connect the representation to the community, and then to the programs and processes and frankly the resources that make those projects happen. It is possible. We know it's possible, and we want to share that with our community.
I'm Al McFarlane. You're listening to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. My co-host is Dr. Irma McLaurin. She's the education and culture editor at is Mitra Jalali. She is city council president for the city of St. Paul. And where I was going with the question, and I appreciate how you responded, council member, was the uniqueness of having an all-woman city council. That's unique and new to my understanding. You didn't go there. You talked about a lot of people who did a lot of work in neighborhoods to get voters to show up, and their work collectively represented a new direction of equity, community. And so I appreciate how you answered that, but Thanks. I still think it's worth talking about the fact that there are women in leadership in the city of St. Paul. And in the previous conversation, Dr. Irma mentioned this whole question of the consequence of patriarchal systems. She didn't go into it, but it's a word that pops up, and I wonder how that sits with you. Sure. What does your emergence say to systems that have traditionally favored a patriarchal hierarchy lineage versus one that is open to everybody? Your answer seems to talk about the need to be open and inclusive and not just one group or the other. But what do you think about that?
Well, I think a lot of things. I would start with the time that I've served in local office as a younger woman. And, in that time, we've seen that the political arena, it continues to be seen as just a very hostile place for women, especially if you are a younger woman, especially if you are a woman of color. You could add in other identity markers, right? Faith, age, whether you're married or unmarried, like all of these things are human qualities that people either kind of assign to you or they pull out to determine who you are as a voter, in ways that men are not as burdened with. And so, I think of some of the harshest things that I've seen where, in the pandemic and during the depth of it, right, in 2020, 2021, like we're not out of it yet, but we all remember just the very dark days of it. And I remember living through a time where like the governor of Michigan had people try to plot an assassination on her at her house as she's trying to run a state where, they're trying to make sure people get vaccinations and that they're like everyone else, right? We're trying to set fair rules for business that balance public health and safety with workers' needs and economic realities. And so I've just been through some really difficult moments in American history where it wasn't just like in our state how women in office were treated, but it was women who are in very high leadership positions around the country. And I think about how when people are super aggressive or hostile to women in leadership, there is a thing to be said that we sign up for these jobs, we sign up for the scrutiny, we sign up for the risks as much as the rewards. And I am always conscientious of how, you know, I did sign up for it so I can take it, but I know that there is a younger woman out there watching it, and that what she is learning from it is, if I try this, this is how I will be treated. And so I am always thinking about, it's like the rocks are thrown at me, but I know that they don't necessarily hit me. They hit someone, the person throwing the rock might not even realize they're hitting. And I feel I feel sensitive about that as someone who is very willing to, frankly, get screamed at or have to answer hard questions or face withering scrutiny where people just write things about you because we have a beautiful democracy with freedom of the press, right? So I think that there's a lot to be said for the way that we as women leaders in this time in our city are going to try to model. We want to do our jobs. We are going to show up and talk to our constituents and listen. We're also going to be clear about our role in this time, about our boundaries. And I personally, you know, speaking for myself, I feel a responsibility to younger women and younger people of color watching that that they don't want to not even try because of what they're seeing me go through. So that's a little bit more personal and tender, if you will. And I do feel like I can talk about that here, but I think it's important to talk about. And the other piece I'll say is I have struggled a bit with the media coverage to date. You have modeled the opposite of this, right? We get asked about being women a lot, and then we don't get asked about policy. So people want to obsess over the fact that we are women, and then they just kind of stop there. And I didn't run for office to be a woman. I ran for office because renters in my community need more support. I ran for office because it is way too warm in February. And we have a whole snow emergency operation that we haven't even touched once this winter season because of climate change. And because we have problems as a city around community safety that we need to be brave and solve with a really different approach. And like, I could just keep going. Like, this is why I get up every day for the city I love. And so I've been really trying to figure out the balance of how do I have these frank conversations as one of very few women of color in like a role where I don't know what the title is for when you're like the president of an elected body, but you know, that is now my reality. It is the first time in our city history that we've had that in St. Paul. I believe that, you know, it is important to talk about. And also we can't let the conversation stop there. And we also can't turn it into, you know, I can never face criticism or questions because of who I am. So it's always trying to hold all that at the same time. Does that make sense?
The balance. Irma, jump in whenever you want to.
No, you've given us a powerful example of what leadership looks like in action. And I think for women of color, it's important to see that. I mean, again, what I spoke about was what I call racialized ageism. And I think this is a moment for the younger generation, but they should not forget that many of us have been in the trenches well before there were all of these support systems, and that there's a body of knowledge, you know, that we may have understandings of structures that they may not be able to see until it hits them or tries to trip them up. And so if you have a council of wise elders, I would suggest that, you know, there are probably a lot of Black women out there in St. Paul and also in Minneapolis of different, you know, backgrounds who probably would love to share. And there may be, sometimes we think we have to reinvent the wheel, but they may have already done it and people have just forgotten about it. And so I think taking advantage of that wisdom is going to be important as well.
Yeah, I think it's been a time where I, in this chapter of leadership, have really drawn on everyone who's ever invested in me, heavily, like you said, Black, Brown, Muslim women, who I share so much identity with. And then also just like really tough, smart, compassionate people of all backgrounds who have said, hey, I see part of my way I can give back is supporting Mitra. So I'm deeply lucky for that, and I could not do my life day to day without that sort of. Everyone has that brain trust, right? That cabinet of people who are in this with you, and public leadership does fundamentally. You need that. Otherwise, you're disconnected from your community. You don't have people who can tell you when you're not seeing something the right way, or to validate that actually, even though in the face of pressure, you're feeling all these things, you are thinking about this the right way. All that's connected. I also have been grateful that with the new members that are here, I still am so sharpened and inspired all the time by them. Like, we have 2 Black women on our council now, Shaniqua Johnson and Anika Bowie, who I am deeply invested in their leadership, personally care very much about seeing them succeed. And then I learn something from them every day and how they're coming to the job differently to say, frankly, like, I'm a Black woman who fought to get into the system at City Hall. We have had no Black women on our council ever since former Councilmember Debbie Montgomery. And that was quite some time ago. And so, they're taking up that mantle, and they are charting a new course. And so I also have people I consider mentors who are frankly younger than me, and who don't, I don't know how else to say this. They're not as jaded or tired as me in some ways. Like, I've seen some things, and you know me, I'm still here. I'm still fighting. I'm not like jaded fundamentally that I'm not waking up every day to lead our council. Right. I love our city, and I feel very lucky to do this work, but I've also really worked to be in tune with who's the universe giving me that I can learn from. And it comes in many shapes and sizes. And I think that's a special thing.
And
Let's drill down on your community safety first platform and policies. Let's talk about safety. It's a hot button issue all the time. We still are in the wake of George Floyd and other police community points of conflict. What are your thoughts? What's driving your thoughts about how we create a, as you describe it, I think, community first public safety strategy? What does that mean?
What does it mean? So I think this became the $1 million question of 2020, and that we've worked to build out since then in St. Paul, a system of supports for people where the fundamental premise is when people are stable and cared for, they are more likely to succeed in life economically and socially. They are less likely to be in negative interactions with police, and they are fundamentally safer. And we also know that within our communities, there are a range of problems that in the most dire moments, only law enforcement is best equipped to respond. We wanted to set out and build that system of supports, and also really look at where law enforcement were being asked to respond in ways that just frankly did not make sense. We did a comprehensive review of 911 calls with Ramsey County, and we saw how everyone was calling 911 for just anything under the sun. And so we were having this strain on officer requests because a cat was stuck in a tree, and then someone saw someone somewhere and wasn't so sure about it, and thing number 4 and 5, right? And you know that already that can also turn into racial bias and people just immediately calling the police. Like, there's a lot of layers to that. So what we did was we said, we're going to really focus the role of police to be professional, accountable, and functional in the most, severe, they're called, I think, priority 1, 2, and 3, the most violent crimes or crimes in progress or things that are the most dangerous. And sometimes those dangerous mental health calls are someone in a mental health crisis, and a police officer is also not necessarily the best person to be the main responder. So we built out a mental health crisis unit so that people who really need help, this part always, I feel it in my heart talking about it because I have friends and neighbors who the person they love the most is having an absolute breakdown, and they're scared because they don't know how to help them. And they're also scared that the quote unquote help they call might suddenly make it so much worse. So it's deep for people. And we built out a responder option that addresses that and cares for those people. In addition to that, it's our broad social infrastructure. So what do I mean by that? We need to increase hours and programs and funding for our parks, libraries, and rec centers so that our kids have enrichment opportunities every step of the way to learn and grow and discover who they are, and, find a healthy, exciting path for each of them in their brilliant, beautiful selves. We need housing for people, right? So we have a ton of work on our hands as the city to make sure people are stably housed and they're not turning to like survival activities to meet those gaps. So there's so much work happening. And the last one I'll speak to is just kind of one of the flagship of it all is the Office of Neighborhood Safety, which has really come to house all these programs and these coordinated activities across multiple departments. So we have Brooke Blakey is our director of Office of Neighborhood Safety, and she's a wonderful person and an amazing leader. And she has a team of staff who are literally interrupting cycles of retaliatory gun violence. Like find out that someone shot somebody and they are on scene. They know that someone has a funeral to plan. They know that a family is traumatized. They know that someone is thinking about getting them back. And they know that they have to act in care and in trauma to stop the cycle of violence from spreading. To me, that is the deep everyday work that is so intense, needs so much support. And most people, they might not even realize it's happening. But for too many communities for too long, we know that they've been left to fend for themselves with all of the disinvestment, all of the discriminatory policies, all of the things that has wrought. We are working as a city to show it doesn't have to be this way. We care, and we're going to build this out together with this council and with our mayor.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm talking with Mitra Jalali, president of St. Paul City Council, and my colleague, co-host, Dr. Irma McLaurin, who's the education and culture editor at Insight News. How does climate action, including transit equity, tie all of these things together? My question is premised on the idea that in history, there's this idea that climate is kind of a luxury problem, that the Sierra Club and people that are very comfortable can sort of look at and think about and pontificate about in their spare time, but it's not something that is owned by ordinary people in ordinary neighborhoods. We know that's not true. How do you turn that into policy actionable?
Well, I'm so glad you brought up just the general kind of specter of white environmentalism, white only environmentalism, and how what we really need to do is tell the truth about how communities of color and indigenous communities are bearing the brunt of inaction on sustainability and on climate. We know that's true everywhere in the world and also in our communities. We know that if you look at a map of policies and disinvestments in the city of St. Paul, and you look at where there was redlining, and you look at where there were industrial train yards and factories and dump sites and concentration of pollution, that it overlaps with a map by race and income, and where there are, childcare deserts and all these other different factors, right, about housing and about economic opportunity. Like the map is always the same map. You could keep switching out the layers of what it's showing you, but it keeps showing you the same thing, which is that public policy and investment choices created that, and we need to uncreate it. We need to make something else. So it's critical that the council and the city understand our role in that. Everything from being really clear on where emissions come from and how we are contributing to that, right? Roughly half of our emissions come from buildings. So our housing and energy efficiency work is really important. About another third comes from transportation emissions. So giving people transportation options is a racial equity imperative. We know that working families who are likely to be low income, Black, Brown, and Asian families, Indigenous families, more likely to rent, more likely to be car dependent. So to have to own a car, to have no choice but to pay hundreds of dollars a month for a car payment, maybe a $600 to $800 unanticipated tire problem, the potholes conversation, all that. That is a financial choice we're forcing people into because we don't invest in transit at the rate we need to. Right. We don't invest in, and we're trying to change, improve conditions on the bus and on these routes that people can use. Bikeway and bike infrastructure. I am always in conversations where the stereotype of who's riding a bike is the white guy in the spandex, but in my experience, it's the Somali kids riding their bike to hang out with their friends, and Black and brown youth who are trying to just use it to get across their neighborhood. They deserve a safe and healthier way to get there. Lastly, I would just say urban heat island. So we know that trees are a form of urban canopy, right? Shading people, literally shade to cool down our city. So all of that's a part of what we can do as a city to invest in the resiliency strategies that protect our neighborhoods.
We're out of time, but what a wonderful conversation. So glad to have this time with you, Irma,
Yes.
with you as well. If you would allow, we'd love to have you back and also bring your colleagues on. We think that what you are doing and what you represent is phenomenal, appropriate, timely, and it deserves to be at every dinner conversation all across our community and across the country as well.
Well,
Mitra, Jalali?
it's an honor. Thank you. And I'm so thrilled to talk with you all. I'd love to come back and to bring some of the fellow incredible women I serve with.
Yes.
So thank you for this space and look forward to talking more in the future.
We'll
And
make
good
it happen.
luck. Yes.
All right. I'm Al
Thank you.
McFarlane. We'll see you next time.